welcome to this Superversive SF live stream where we're talking about Pulp magazines and also the launch of Superversive Press's new Pulp magazine, Astounding Frontiers. So this week we have, or this time we have the usual collection of people. Ben Zitsky, Daddy Warpig, Declan Finn, John C. Wright, Josh Young, L. Jadgy Lamplighter Wright, and we also have two special guests, Jeffro Johnson from the Castalia House blog and the author of Appendix N, and Lou Antonelli, who contributed the story Riders of the Red Mist.
Shift.
It's too early here. Riders of the Red Shift to Astounding Frontiers #1. So, where do we want to start?
How about starting with a description of Astounding Frontiers and what it is and what we're doing?
Okay, so apparently it sounds like I sound like a robot. That's a problem. That's a problem. I can't do anything about my mic. I'm stuck with what I've got, unfortunately.
This is a feature. It's a feature. You sound like a robot. We're a science fiction chat. I would go with it.
Just repeat after me. Batu Barata Nikto.
Necktie. I said the words.
What? Shirada nicotine? What?
I will. All right. I will attempt to not. I will attempt to be clear then. Astounding Frontiers. Astounding Frontiers is a new pulp magazine with short stories. We aim to bring short stories and serials in it, with an aim to bring. Well, the tagline is "Give us 10 minutes and we'll give you a world." As much as possible, we want the stories to be quite short. Tend to be about 10-minute reads, and oh, it sounds like a fan is hitting my mic. It's probably because I'm on a hands-free headset and it's banging against my face.
It might be because I had a fan running right next to me.
Is that any better?
Mildly, maybe.
All right, let's see how we go.
You sound fine.
All right, anyway, that's Astounding Frontiers. That's what we're aiming to do. Tell a lot of short science fiction stories. Tell high adventure pulp stories.
So both short and high, right?
Sure. Yes, short and high indeed. Anyway, that's Astounding Frontiers in a nutshell. Doing things a bit differently to the way we did Sci-Fi Journal. The biggest difference probably being, why is Daddy Warpig on the chat twice? The biggest difference is the way we're taking submissions, I think, which is pretty much limiting it to people we know and trying to solicit stuff as much as possible, rather than just letting anyone submit. Keeping things manageable. Anyway. So, yeah, that's Astounding Frontiers in a nutshell. $2.99 through good ebook retailers and $6.99 in print. That's as cheap as I could make it and still make any money doing it. So,
can either you or Ben or someone who's knows tell us a little bit about a couple of stories, just so anyone listening can get a taste of what goodies are waiting for them?
Sure. So, in the first issue, we have 3 serials which I'm quite excited about. One is Nick Cole and Jason Anaspach. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Nick and Jason, we're serializing their book Galactic Outlaws, which is, so if you want to get a taste of that before you jump in for the whole story. And I have on good authority that if all goes well, we'll actually be serializing the first bit of that before moving into original short stories, perhaps a serial in that universe. So that's coming, something to look forward to. We also have John's Some Wither that we're starting to serialize before that finally comes out.
Correction, No Wither. Some Wither's already out.
Sorry.
Sequel to Some Wither.
The second in John's Wither series. How's that?
That's fun.
There we go.
I'm so bad at remembering the names of things. And also, Ben Wheeler isn't here, is he? But we have the start of Ben Wheeler's novel. Oh, let me find the name.
In the Seraglio of the Shake of Mars.
There,
1001 Nights, but space opera.
Which is, yes, Ben's crazy sprawling space opera that's, I like what I've read of it.
That's a great title. That's a great title. I haven't read it yet.
Story. It's a great story.
I haven't read it yet. I haven't read it.
It reads like something you wrote, John.
There is no higher compliment, in my opinion.
I
made it.
Did someone else just arrive?
Yes, yeah, Ben Wheeler just in the group chat.
We were just talking about In the Seraglio.
You're just in time. We wanted you to describe your short story that appears in the magazine.
It's amazingly perfect timing.
Yes, Ben, please.
Oh, that's amazing. I just got myself into a library here after my internet unfortunately went down. Let me tell you. So which short story?
In the Seraglio of the Shake of Mars. In the Seraglio of the Shake of Mars.
Yeah. Basically, it's an old guy at his daughter's wedding talking about how he won the kingdom and saved his wife from the clutches of the Sheik of Mars and had sword fights, all sorts of adventures, motorcycle chases, harem adventures, and met such interesting characters as the nefarious and self-serving duo Brains and Brawn, a Uranian fortune teller from the pleasure cities captured in a raid, all kinds of things. It's pretty great.
In terms of short stories, we also have, maybe I'll do them in reverse order. Well, we have Watson's Demon by Sarah Salviander. Sarah, who's not here, but hopefully will join us at some point, is an astrophysicist. And she's got a fun little story about a scientist having some problems with a higher dimensional life form. I quite liked it. It's a fun little short story. We have Stopover on Monta Colony by Erin Lale. I don't know that much about Erin.
Erin is good, people. She used to be acquisitions editor for, what the heck was that bloody publication? A publication I don't remember right now, which is sad because I used to be part of it. And she's fairly big in short stories. She's appeared in like 4 anthologies in the past 6 months. So she gets around.
Stopover on Monte Colony is, well, it's an exciting adventure, but it's what it sounds like. It's about a stopover on a colony called Monta and the hijinks that ensue. I won't spoil it. We have According to Culture by Declan Finn, which I like, and well, actually, I think let me just, oh, come on, 37. How about I just read the first line, which I think sums up the feel of Declan's story nicely. Eti Gawai, is that how you pronounce it? Looked over his latest batch of slaves, going from one holographic to an image to another, when the wall exploded. That pretty much sold me on the story.
Now that is a solid beginning.
It's a great opening line. I think that opening line sums up what we're trying to do with Astounding Frontiers.
I used to run role-playing games where I always started new people off with the line, machine gun fire comes in the window, what do you do? So Declan's, it's even better than that. The whole wall explodes.
Yeah, it's just a good, I read the first line and I went, if the rest of the story holds up, this is exactly what we're looking for.
That's great.
We also have the Death Ride of the Sun's Joyous, which is a story by Patrick S. Baker. If you remember his story Hoplite from Sci-Fi Journal, it's set in the same universe where It's basically action adventure military SF story in a world where the starships are captained, have a human brain as their central computer core, and they're great stories with lots of action. I really enjoy them. I think his earlier story, Hoplite, is one of my favorite stories I've ever published, and this is up to the same standard. So
It's Space Marines battling aliens.
yes, it kicks off and it's all shooty all the time. It's quite exciting. It's great. And finally, we have Riders of the Red Shift by Lou Antonelli. Lou, do you want to tell us about your story, seeing as you're here?
Sure. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
John's not talking, so you better strike while the iron's hot.
I can hear you, though.
Well, I have a disadvantage because I'm a Texan. I talk slow, so there's going to be many opportunities for anybody to jump in, right?
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
We'll wait for it.
Well, Riders of the Red Shift actually was on submission to an anthology that had already accepted it. James Reasoner, actually. And I told James, I said, listen, Jason Rennie, he's a nice guy. He's starting this new magazine. I think I have a story that would work for him. Do you mind if I withdraw it? And James Reasoner said, sure, if you write me another one, which at the rate I write stories, I said, no problem. So I submitted to Jason. He accepted it. And then I wrote another story for James. And actually, that got published first. It's in the Rocket's Red Glare anthology. So now the Riders of the Red Shift has been printed. It is basically, I tend to write a lot of alternate history and secret history. So it's kind of a secret history. It's about uncovering an ancient secret involving people who were early pioneers into space and suffered great hardships, and the circumstances of the hardships have been the historical record has been altered. Not that we'd ever expect that to happen in real life, you know.
Oh no.
So it's one of those cases where, and I'm sure you all would agree, there's many times when you start with a snappy title and you write a story to go along with the snappy title, and that was basically it. I wanted a Western, a title that, you know, reeked of Westernness. And I came up with the title, and then I wrote this story to accommodate it. And it's like, and of course, you know, Texas and the ostensible Republic of Texas figures in it. So, you know, I'm kind of proud of it. I think it's a worthy addition to the first issue. And like I said, when Jason told me what he was looking for, I thought, you know, it would be a good fit. So it's had an interesting publication history, because not only was it accepted by James, but it was actually accepted for an anthology earlier, and the anthologist took so long to publish, I actually withdrew it from him. So pretty much it was the third time's the charm. But that's the way things happen.
Well, I'm glad we ended up with it, because it's quite a fun story. Incidentally, if anyone listening is wondering how to go about submitting, if they'd like to, like I said, it's sort of an in-house process, but the best way to do it, friend me on Facebook and talk to me and pitch me your story, and we'll go from there. It's not that hard. It's just easier than now. It's easier.
And Jason's really nice. He's not going to, you know, bite your head off or anything. You'll survive the
That's
process.
what the drop bears are for.
Yeah, bear in mind, folks, this is the first time I've been on one of these live things in 2 years, because I was one in 2015 that got me in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, Lou, let's not get you in trouble this time.
No idea. It's too crazy.
Yeah. Hey, Lou, what could possibly go wrong?
There are no crazy ideas, just crazy people.
There you go.
I think they're crazy ideas.
So
I live in Texas.
Hold my
But
beer.
do crazy ideas exist in and of themselves, separate from the crazy people, or do they only exist contingent upon the mind of the crazy people?
They sometimes
I think we
climb
can
out of the mind
probably
and cross and get into Texas and are roaming around in the desert plains there.
Hey, Jason, could I read Corey's little thing he sent?
All right, and then what I thought would be good, so people can stop listening to my horrible robot voice by all accounts. We've got
you're sounding a little better.
we've got Daddy Warpig and Jeffro Johnson here. Maybe they can tell us a bit about Pulp Revolution after that. But please,
That
what
sounds great. Let me go ahead and read this, and then I'll sign off, and I can just listen and let them go on from there. I'm sure they have plenty they can say. Okay, so Corey McCleary couldn't be with us. I think he's on a road trip from one place to another today. But he sent a message. So he says, Astounding Frontiers is more than a pulp magazine to me. It's a magazine where I have my first piece of fiction published, a serial known as Daughter of Soul. And when I have reached out to the Superversive literary movement first, and while I have reached out to the Superversive literary movement first, I do like what the Pulp Revolution is doing as well. And I really don't think those two things are in conflict, since they
No, not at all.
they approach things from two different parts of things. It's like saying, I like Victorian houses and I also like wood. Well, you can have both in the same place. That being said, my story will show up in the magazine, though I believe it's an issue 2. And when it does, when people seeking who's to blame for the madness, there are 3 people that he says here are to blame for the madness of his story. First, Tom Simon. He mentioned attempting to write a serial, and my reaction to that was, yeah, I could do that too. So I decided to imitate Edgar Rice Burroughs in this matter. Second, Brian Niemeyer. While I have come up with a cross-genre science fiction fantasy book, his stuff has a different tone and a feel that I like better. His book, Ethereal, added to the mood, making this more fantasy than other science fantasy space opera I'm writing. So Brian influenced the mood of his, and I always think of Brian as having kind of a Zelazny mood, but since he hasn't actually read Zelazny, that's just by chance. Okay, and Corey continues. Third, John C. Wright. He wrote an article about what precisely qualifies as a space princess, and seeing as there aren't enough space princesses in modern fiction, I thought I'd add one to my humble offering. That means that Corey is now in the space princess movement, along with John and
Edward Willett.
Edward Willett. He continues, but my story, I tried hard to explain it to people via analogies. It's like Harry Potter in that the main character learns magical arts, but unlike Harry Potter, Professor McGonagall isn't he's a warrior monk who's also a lizard man alien with way cool powers, faster than light thought, and Professor Snape isn't a cyborg or a woman. I don't know exactly what that means by the isn't. It is like Conan in the sense that one of the heroes is a barbarian warrior, but unlike Howard's work, Conan is a 9-foot-tall crustacean. It is like A Princess of Mars if John Carter was a space marine as well as a space wizard, and Deja Thoris was half-star. In favor of half-star things. I like that kind of story. So it's a mix of everything I've read thanks to some of the people here. Thank you for letting me be part of this whole show, Corey. All right, I'm going to log out, but I'll listen to you guys. I'll come try to get back in if I think you need me. But I think you guys can carry it. Love you all.
All right.
Bye,
So Jeffro or Daddy Warpig, who would like to go first? Pulp Revolution in a nutshell. Go. One of you jump in. Come on, be brave.
Well, there is.
How do I need to say that to you two? You two are maniacs.
They're afraid of the drop bears.
The Pulp Revolution is what music people would call a scene right now. It's a large group of people who all share somewhat parallel ideas about what they like in fiction, about elements from science fiction and fantasy that have been missing from the genre or underemphasizing the genre for a very long time. And right now, it's small but growing rapidly, and there are, in addition to the people and the fans involved in the scene, there's a small but, again, growing rapidly group of authors who are looking at the Pulp Revolution, looking at what was offered, in the stories of the pulps and beginning to take inspiration from that, not to write pastiches or photocopies or redos of old material, but to take what made those stories great and to reincorporate them into modern stories. It is not an aesthetic movement. It's not a movement of costumes and props and scenery. It's very much about an action-oriented, audience-oriented ethos to look back at where the science fiction fantasy went and pick a different path, to go back in time and redevelop from the same base in a different direction and see what we can do in that direction. Because it seems to me, and it seems to a lot of people, that modern fantasy and science fiction has, in a lot of ways, stagnated. And I do mean generally outside of the people I've met in the Superversive SF, or the Superversive group. I don't think the fiction that you people have been producing is stagnant at all. But if you look at what gets past the gatekeepers at the big five publishers, it is dull, lifeless garbage. If you look at what gets nominated and has won Hugos since 2000, by and large, with a few rare exceptions, it's been dull, lifeless garbage. And so the question is, what is it that was so vital? What is it that was so moving? What is it that was so touching? What is it that was so interesting and thrilling and amazing about these stories from the 1920s and 1930s, about Robert E. Howard, about Edgar Rice Burroughs, about A. Merritt, about Lee Brackett, about C.L. Moore, and about all the other authors? What is it about their stuff that was so great? And then using that and saying, can we take whatever it is that was great about it and make new stories using that same sensibility, using that same material? So it doesn't matter if your story has Art Deco rocket ships and Buck Rogers ray guns. If you do have those, that's fine, but that's not what the point of the story is. You can take very modern technology, like John Mollison has done in a book called Rescue Run, and take that modern technology, modern science fiction, even hard science fiction, and wrap it around that aesthetic, wrap it around that vitality, that audience-oriented moral code, and make something that's unique, make something great. And so instead of trying to recapture the past or photocopy the past, we're trying to make new stuff, but bring back some of what the hobby or some of what the genre has been missing for a long time.
Amen, brother.
Let me ask you a leading question. What was it? What was the factor that was present in those old stories that is absent, that the gatekeepers are blocking? Because you and I have talked about this, and I have my own theory, but I want to throw that out as a question.
I'll answer that.
Yeah, go for it.
You can see look what happened to art like around 1900 or so. There was a big shift in it where you end up. The Frisky Pagan talks about this in his book on Dangerous Gamers. But you end up right around World War I. You have this guy put in an art museum an art piece that's like a toilet was his work of art. And the pulps ignored this kind of devolution of the arts. It was like just a place where people could write about exciting things, beautiful things, horrific things, terrifying things. All that stuff could be approached on its own terms and without any kind of cynicism. And what happened in 1940 or 1937 or so, the forces that had ground through literature and turned it into this place of despair and meaninglessness and boredom and everything else. Then they started working on adventure fiction. They decided to come into that. And if you look, I just mentioned this on Castelia House blog today. You look at the people that look at all the reviews of all the old works, how they grapple with them, what frustrates them about the old works. There's a wall in people's brains today. They're like people in the wreckage of the Roman Empire, centuries later, looking back on this other time period, and they really struggle. And James Desborough talking about what the pulp revolution is doing from the outside, as someone that's interested in elements of pulp, his own type of revival of those elements. He looks at that and the concept of moral certitude, the moral elements of the old pulp stories. His first instinct when he deals with people that are defending that, or that want to embody that, or want to revive that, he wants to equate that with Nazism, because it short circuits his brain. He's lived under decades where the only message that came out of the big publishing and the literature and the newspapers, Newsweek, everything else, is this drumbeat of basically a post-Christian culture. And what you see,
a nihilist culture.
What you see in the pulps is unvarnished, with no cynicism, no chaser, no dilution. You see the product of a Christian civilization, a Christian, and a lot of people want to push back at that and say, well, so and so wasn't a Christian, and so was, but the culture was. They weren't writing Sunday school tracts or things like that. They were an embodiment of Western and American ideals. And you look at some of the critics, what they say when they come in and look at that. What's that Damon Knight quote where he says that DeCamp wrote better Conan stories than Howard. He says that DeCamp was too wise to really believe anything. Okay, and that really sums it up. The people that actually believe in honor and virtue and things like that those things were real to them. And that heroic people were real, wise people were real, and they could all exist. People that had not repudiated the concept of virtue can simply do this better than people that don't believe that. And so what you have here is a reversal of this march through the institutions that came about in 1900 in the arts, and then in 1940 in adventure literature, where these people who wanted to tear all this stuff down, you now have people that are in position to march back and retake this ground. And that's really what's happening.
What I think is funny is that movies like Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark were deliberate homages to an earlier era of movies, when the movies were also pulp, because they were from the serials. And those movies were such huge hits that they changed an entire generation's perception of science fiction and adventure stories, but nobody in Hollywood copied them. But those two films should be retroactively included as part of the pulp revival, because they really were pulp. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're totally right.
The moral certainty you're pointing at, you're also exactly right. The Edgar Rice Burroughs was in no sense a Christian, but he had his people act like knights. He had his people act according to their rigid moral code, and so did Robert E. Howard. Conan never breaks his word or leaves a weaker companion behind. He doesn't kick the guy off the boat and say, "You're too weak to be a pirate with me." He never does it, okay, because he's got a code. And that was the fact that Star Wars was so appealing to an entire generation shows that people are really hungry for this thing. And the wisdom that leads to sorrow that Damon Knight is talking about is a desert. There's nothing there. There's no stories there. There's no wellspring of life there. So I say amen to the pulp revolution, and I say long overdue.
I think the thing that accelerated the process that Jeff was talking about, and I totally agree with what Daddy Warpig said too, was that about a decade ago, it really became common, and I think John Scalzi was partially responsible for this. It used to be you read the story, and then later, if you happened to find out about the person's religion or politics, well, it's okay, but it wasn't important to the literature. But then John Scalzi kind of set the standard that you find out what the person's politics and religions first, and that determines whether you read them. And that I think that really made a big mess of things, you know. And in response to what Daddy's saying, you know, are we making a virtue out of necessity? Are we essentially being pushed into a ghetto or the catacombs, as it were, you know, back to the catacombs? I feel, you know, it's kind of like tripartite, you know. We're developing our own institutions because we don't have access to the mainstream stuff. You know, my story in this issue of Astounding Frontiers is my 110th published short story. So I publish a lot of short stories. I don't submit to places like Tor or Uncanny or Lightspeed. They're not going to consider me, and it's just silly. And so, you know, it'd be, you know, I just wish there was more open-mindedness and, you know, attention to entertainment as a factor. But we're in a politicized age. It's unfortunate, and we're on the minority side. You know, it's like what Whittaker Chambers told his wife.
Actually,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, actually, we outnumber them. We're not in the minority. We're in the majority. But they have control of the high ground.
I remember that. We're not on the establishment side, but we are on the side of the majority. The establishment is siding with an ever-dwindling minority.
I want to read something I wrote the other day to someone who was asking if the pulp revolution is political.
Sorry, can I just throw in a comment? I thought we were going to have to throw Lou off the podcast because he was about to praise John Scalzi. Fortunately, he didn't. Continue.
That's very funny.
Someone asked me if the pulp revolution was political, or it came up in a discussion, and my response to that is this:
the answer is you have made it so, sir. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Forgive me for interrupting.
The pulp revolution is not political as much as it is anti-political, or rather anti-propaganda. Most of us reject the notion that everything is politics, that the person was political. Our stories don't have to advance anyone's preferred policy agenda, even our own. Stories are for entertainment, not indoctrination.
Amen.
Amen. And that is also a political statement because the enemy's politics, one of their doctrines of their pseudo-religion, and it is a religion, not a political stance, because it involves every aspect of life, not just the aspects of the public order and law and order. You know what I'm saying? Politics is about how to arrange your laws to run your society. Religion is about your soul. It's about everything. It's about the universe. These guys have turned, because they've rejected real religion, they have to make up their own religion, and for them it's politics. So for them, everything is politics, and rejecting the notion that everything is politics is for them a political stance. So they will regard you as political no matter what you do. But I completely agree. The whole Sad Puppies kerfluffle was basically on that point as to whether everything had to be political or not. And the Sad Puppies said, no, we just want to tell good stories. And for that, we were excoriated.
Well, I think the Sad Puppies thing was mainly...
Something very noisy just came online.
Yeah, that was Adam Troy Castro.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Adam Troy Castro tapping, doing the wiretapping. He's going to report this all to the KGB. Sad Puppies, in my view, was mostly a social phenomenon. It was snobbery, it was elitism. The politics is part of the culture that's tied into elitism. You know, I'm a first-generation American. I'm used to being treated like crap, you know, so it didn't bother me as much. But honestly, it's just social snobbery, people just sneering at the lower class. That's all.
Yeah, but their elitism is also part of their politics. It's also part of their worldview. They regard themselves as the enlightened, and the rest of us, the majority, are the bedighted. Even though, just between you and me, my education is much better than theirs, and my IQ is like 40 points higher. So.
Yeah, well, the thing that protects me is I live in East Texas. So it's like I told, you know, I live in a very Bible Belt. You know, we're the notch on the Bible Belt. So I feel very secure where I am. I don't know what about the rest of y'all. You'll be in trouble.
Oh, I'm in St. Louis. We're gonna have fun, I'm sure, next time Ferguson rolls around.
You should read my book Count to a Trillion, because in the future that I predict, Texas is the only state that makes it through the trouble. What's that noise? Who's doing that?
I say it's Adam Troy Castro recording this stuff, you know, so he can.
Well, I wish he would mute his mic when it's happening.
Yeah. No, Texas is its own culture, and it's very, you know, a lot of people said before the election that there was so much denunciation of Trump. I knew a hairstylist here who in the court of doing hairstyling would carry on conversation with people, and she told me, honest to God, I can't say anything that would be attributed as being critical of Trump. People jump down my throat.
Well, Texas has one advantage over every other state in the union, which is that your legislature only meets once every like 2 years, and they can only meet for 100 days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Passing a law, so you guys have been very wise about how to keep your legislature on a short leash.
Yeah, it's
okay. We welcome Sarah to the chat.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah.
How y'all doing?
Yeah,
nice to have you.
I think when it comes to talking about politics and I'm sorry, it's real echoey. I'm in a study room because my internet went down at home and I had to go to a library. But when it comes to it, like I was having to look over my bookshelves and I realized I had nothing substantial past like 1996, except for like 1 or 2 stories and then a bunch of stuff like John C. Wright has written, and like looked at my Kindle, it's all a bunch of Superversive stuff. Like whether or not it's I've got a whole bookshelf dedicated to you and a Kingdom Hearts box. You know, that's one shelf. It basically, it's like I look at it and I see like the works of N.K. Jemisin and these other people who we basically are arrayed against us and our allies and those who may not agree with us but are on the same side in a vague way. And like every time I read it, I'm like, I don't want to read this. Like, it's gotten to the point where people could say, well, you know, Scalzi's red shirts was supposed to be pretty good. I don't want to read it. I don't care. He's made himself the enemy of the people who I would rather work with and join arm in arm and stuff like that. You know, if he is to be all about the politics and his politics is everything and he attacks us and those who are like me, you know, sure, it's pretty, you know, white and black to me because that's how I see things, but it's, you know, I'm not going to buy any of his books. I'm not going to spend money on his books. Nothing needs to be done for him. Nothing needs to be praised of him. If he wants to enjoy it, he better write something that's so good it gets even my interest.
Well, actually, I think part of the problem with them even doing that is, I remember an old definition of Puritans where it's somebody who fears that someone somewhere is having fun.
H.L. Mencken, for those of you who are curious. H.L. Mencken said that.
Thank you. I did not have that on the top of my head.
I was just boasting about my education. There it is.
Okay, everybody, hang on. Sarah.
Yes.
How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you are very out of the ordinary for this crowd. Well, you're very different from this crowd, and you haven't been here before. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us how you came to write Watson's Demon. But don't get the ending away.
Okay. So, yeah, I grew up in Canada and moved to the U.S. to get my education. I've got a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Texas, and I stayed there after I got my PhD, and I actually just recently quit my job because the whole higher education academic system in the United States is getting kind of crazy, and I just didn't want to be part of it anymore, and so I'm moving into doing other things, and so trying my hand at a little bit of fiction writing, and that's how I got in this really cool magazine. And I'm writing nonfiction books, reconciling Christianity with modern science, and still doing a little bit of research on the side. So that's pretty much where I'm at.
Where do you live?
I live in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can meet up in August 4th to 6th when the Armadillocon convention's going on.
Hey, that sounds fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm in East Texas. I'm 5 hours away, but you know, this is Texas. You know, some people drive 2 hours to get to their mailbox.
Yeah, right.
So you people reckon Texas is big, but for me to drive to the next big city is 12 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Or to drive
the next big city for you?
Oh, actually, no. It's probably more like if we drive to Canberra, which is nominally the what do you call it? The capital of the country. That's about 6 or 7 hours away. But you know, to drive to Melbourne or Brisbane, that's closer to 12, and they're the big
but see,
cities.
the problem you got though is the only people you could brag to is New Zealand. We can brag to all the other 49 loser states.
Well, there's that. That's true.
But then there's Alaska. Texas is cute and small.
Because you know, like my whole country is as big as the United States. It's just we have the population of LA County spread out across the most of its desert. So
you know, if Texas was its own country, our economy would basically be the same economy the size of Australia too.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. We're
typical Texan.
There's not that many of us.
I was born in Massachusetts, actually.
But you've gotten better?
Well, I met and married a Texas girl. She dropped the net over me, and I married her.
And she broke you in next year?
All right, let's try to get back on the topic. So, yeah, Sarah, that's cool. I don't know what else to ask you. Anybody else?
Synopsis of a story? What's a story like?
I liked it. It's a. Well, Sarah, do you want to give us the elevator pitch for your story?
Oh, the story that just was in this month's issue.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Just a little quickie story. I was when I taught modern physics in university, and so this is the introductory course when students, after they take classical physics, the Newtonian stuff, and then we move them into things like relativity and quantum mechanics and statistical mechanics. And I was teaching them about thermodynamics, and we encountered something. We're talking about like the second law of thermodynamics, and most people are familiar with that. It's the one that says that basically you can't have perpetual motion, things like that. And there's a story about Maxwell, who thought that he came up with a loophole in that. You can have this little demon that kind of can arrange things and can sort out the faster molecules from the slower ones, so that you can actually prevent things like heat loss from a system. And other people pointed out that it wasn't really a loophole because the demon would be part of the system. And I thought, well, what if you had something that was higher dimensional and could mess with an experiment or something and give it the illusion of breaking the laws of physics? And so then I decided to write this little story illustrating that principle. Some nasty little hyperdimensional being messing with this poor physicist in his laboratory.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it when I read it.
Yeah, it's a fun story. Now today, some of these people read really fast.
I haven't read it. Is the demon part of the same system or not?
Well, so that's the trick. He's hyperdimensional, but if these dimensions would be considered part of the universe, I think. I mean, I'm kind of leaving it open-ended for the reader to decide if the hyperdimensions are part of the system or not. If it is, then you're not breaking any laws. If it's not, then it's kind of a wrinkle. Just from the perspective of the physicist, it would look like things were pretty weird.
I did a similar thing in one of my stories where the loophole was that if you stuff your entropy into a black hole, so it's over an event horizon from you, from your point of view, entropy is not decreasing. You can have a perpetual motion machine, but if you took the whole system into account, including the interior conditions of a black hole, that is difficult to analyze. If you can't really see into it, then entropy still works.
That's actually legit.
And I got...
Sorry, go ahead.
Great. I got the idea from a short story by called the Venetian Court, which was later made into a novel, where a guy does invent a perpetual motion machine, but he finds out that he's actually getting his extra energy from hell, and so there's a bit of a dreadful side effect to his machine.
Coincidentally,
I wish I could remember the name of the.
Coincidentally, that's the plot of both Doom games, Doom 3 and Doom game.
Didn't know that.
Secretly, they read John C. Wright, even as they
No,
Doom guy.
I'm not the one who said that the center of a black hole was hell. That was Disney. Charles L. Harness, an excellent author and one who's often overlooked. Charles L. Harness wrote that story that I stole that idea from.
Well, Maximum Chaos, that works, yeah.
John, please don't mention Disney. I'm actually looking at a Twitter hashtag for A Wrinkle in Time, brought to you by Disney and Oprah Winfrey. So all I can think is...
Yeah. I was going to meet you guys and watch that trailer for a minute. I just haven't had the heart yet because I know it's going to make me so angry.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a trailer out?
Yeah, just
you guys will not believe me. Disney used to be top-notch storytellers, and there was a time when Disney would do things like go out hunting and do all this stuff that wasn't politically correct, and it was one of the best companies on earth, and it's just got ruined. And the same thing's going to happen to science fiction if the pulp revolution does not succeed in its efforts, Daddy. So don't feel under any pressure, but our entire future is depending on you.
That will be fine.
But don't feel any pressure.
And if it fails, Texas will save you all.
Typical Texan.
Sounds like the inner sanctum.
Very, very nice evil laugh you've got going there.
We should get him to say things like, return the map that you have stolen.
Yeah, it's just, he deserves killing. Hang him. Kate the misdemeanor homicide.
So where do people see? Actually, who we should have got onto this? We should have seen if Russell Newquist could join us.
Yeah.
Linus magazine. Oh well, what's done is done. We can always do another one of these. There's no limit. So where do people think? How do people think the pulp revolution is going?
I will tell you where it's going. The pulp revolution is gaining steam, and many authors who had been previously, in addition to the new authors who were involved at the ground floor, many authors who had previously published, like Brian and like David J. West, have started pushing their stuff under the pulp revolution banner. It's getting more and more notice, and those on the social justice left who have been obsessed with Vox Day are finally noticing on the Castalia House blog the fact that Jeffro smuggled in pretty much the entire core of the pulp revolution under Vox's nose, which is where they noticed the pulp revolution and have started ranting about it. I just saw for the first time this last week some leftist author on quote author. He claims to be an author. I don't know anything. I've never heard of him. I don't know anything he's written. He may have written 50 books. He may have written one short story. I don't know, but he claims to be a science fiction author who went on an extended rant about how evil it was to look to the past to try and save the medium. Of course, he gets everything wrong. He gets everything wrong about what the pulp revolution is. He gets everything wrong about what we're saying, about what we're doing, and it's not hard to find what we're doing. We're having a conversation across Twitter, across Google+, across the Castalia House blog, across a new blog specifically for the Pulp Revolution, and on Jeffro's blog. And so it's not hard to find out what we're saying and what we mean, but obviously they're not going to do it because that would mean they would grapple with bad things, which gives them headaches. That's not a joke. That's literal. It's true. But the Pulp Revolution, where it's going, is that we are only barely getting noticed by the outermost fringe of SJWs, those who are obsessed with Vox. And for everyone else, especially for authors, if they've heard about us at all, it's in this kind of vague sense that maybe we're, retrograde fascists or something. But with an audience-oriented storytelling style, and assuming we can keep on drawing in skilled authors, and assuming that we can have authors who grew up in the Pulp Revolution movement or started publishing in it get better and better and better, my prediction is that this is going to be the equivalent of a force majeure in publishing, because the people who are publishing right now, you can understand, the Pulp Revolution publishes fantasy stories, it publishes science fiction stories, it publishes soap opera, everything that gets published under the banner of fantasy and science fiction is fodder for pulp revolution. And so we don't have any innate. We have a steampunk author, John Delarose, who was on this show last month, and we don't have any innate restrictions as to genre. And so everything in publishing is wide open for invasion and colonization by pulp revolutionaries. And people who are in those genres right now, who are gatekeepers, aren't going to see it coming. And most importantly, if people keep on focusing on pleasing the audience, keep on focusing on writing stories that draw the audience in, and they can continue building an audience, the success in terms of the number of readers coming to it is going to shock them and surprise them, and it will to them seem like a bolt out of the blue, even though this is something that has been building for a couple of years now.
Yeah, what I see happening is all the people coming to me and saying, you know, I just drifted away from fantasy and science fiction, and I just wasn't reading, and they come out. There's a very large audience here that has needs that are not being met. And when they hear the talk about Appendix N or Pulp Revolution,
am I the only one who's hearing that?
You are now.
Who is that?
I don't
It
know.
might have been me. I was just wiping my hands.
all right, please mute. All right, so when people hear about Appendix N and the buzz around that, and go back and read some of the old stories, they load up their Kindles. They load up. They go to Project Gutenberg. They buy stuff on Amazon. They get their to read pile goes from 0 to 80 books, and then they start reading the Pulp Revolutionaries. So you have this. They're trickling in right now. And they come in, and there's like a doubling effect. You know, Daddy Warpig saw this coming last year, and I thought I would run it as a joke. I'd put Pulp Revolution on my tweets, and it was just a running gag. But these people just started showing up, and they were like, "This is what we want. This is what we want to do," and they weren't joking. You know, it was a joke for me, but it wasn't for them. And so there's a doubling going on right now, and the excitement is building. And and it's not just Kursova magazine. You got Bryce Beatty's Story Hack. You've got now this other magazine, Astounding something or other. What is that again? Astounding Frontiers, yes, which is really good, by the way. I every time one of these new magazines comes out, I always have this sinking feeling of like, what if they don't get it right? Wow. I'm
hoping we do.
The short, Declan's story with all of that action in the opening, that is not what you got in a science fiction magazine, say in the 90s when you picked it up. You got something totally different from that. And like nobody's doing Star Wars right now, which is bizarre. It's a monster movie franchise, and no one's actually doing Star Wars. And so you pick up.
That's my point. No one's ever done it. That's what I thought was so odd about that.
You pick up Nick Cole's story, and it's just like the stuff I play in my Traveler games. And that turns out to be weirdly a great critical frame to look for good science fiction and fantasy is do you want to sit down and play this at the table with your friends? And say somebody was saying Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale doesn't pass that test, but you pick up Nick Cole's piece that he co-authored in this issue of Astounding Frontiers, and yes, let's do that. We want roll the dice. So taking it back to where things are going, there is a revolution in fantasy and science fiction that comes about every 40 years. The first revolution was 1900 or so, with the initial pulp revolution that culminated into the careers of Edgar Rice Burroughs and A. Merritt. The next one was what's referred to incorrectly as the golden age of science fiction. That came in under John Campbell and really picked up steam in the 40s, and then transitioned into the new wave over time. It was an inherently unstable frame that drifted very quickly along other lines. The next revolution came in 1980 approximately, with a consolidation of the gatekeeping positions and a narrowing of the field and an elimination of science fantasy as a genre. And now we are coming up on the next big one. We're in the prelude. I'm looking at approximately 2020 for there to be, official. It'll be official. The transition has happened, and we are in the new era. And the Pulp Revolution is basically the prelude to that. Everything's about to change.
Okay.
23 years, that gives me plenty of time to write plenty of novels to sell when it kicks off.
I was just thinking I might actually have Buddha's Dream of Enlightened Sheep finished by then.
Is that ever coming out?
Eventually. Turns out babies in seminary suck up all your writing time.
Here's the thing about SJW authors. They are writing not to make the audience entertained or to move them or to touch them or to thrill them or to horrify them. They're writing to make the audience feel righteous by allowing the audience to vicariously enjoy hearing the proper political positions espoused. And so they're really writing, and they're also writing for themselves, to make themselves feel righteous, because they're a good person who believes the right thing and endorses the right political beliefs, the right ideology. Pulp Revolution authors are writing for an audience, and especially because so many of the ones who have just started out are brand new. They're scrambling to try and develop an audience and grow an audience. So not only is the ethic of writing for your audience, to give the audience a great story, to give the audience thrills, to give the audience all of these other emotional interactions with your story, not only is that good because those make for great stories, but it's also a good ethic for people who are just starting out to get into the habit of doing writing to please the audience. And so just their very basic core orientation is healthier and more effective from the point of view of the business side of things, of developing an audience, of growing an audience. They are already doing better stuff than SJW authors can, because they're not concerned with making you feel righteous. People who wrote pulp stories in the classic days, that wasn't their job to make you feel righteous. It was your job to go out and be a good person and go to church and do whatever. It was your job to make you feel like you were doing good in the world. It was their job to lift your burdens, to, even for a moment, take your mind off of the horrible things that you had to do in life, or the horrible things you had to endure or survive. And that would give you the strength to go out and continue to grapple with this reality. And if we can get back to that ethos, and if we can draw in an audience, I predict that is exactly the kind of ethic that will underline mass market success in terms of reaching an audience, because people will love it and they will want more of it and they will read more of it and they will buy more of it. So financial success for those authors who are good enough and who stick with it, and success as a group, success as a movement, to reach a large number of people if we can continue working and developing our talents and developing our storytelling abilities.
How do you think the Dragon Awards are fitting into this process? I want your opinion.
I think that the Hugos are a tiny award for a very small cloistered group of people, and that the Dragon Awards, by the very nature of Dragon Con itself, being, what was it, 60,000 people a year go to Dragon Con? I know it's in that vicinity. That's it's very much oriented towards a wide audience, and it's very popular, and especially it's very popular among authors, and so they can publicize them among their readers. And so you have a huge that's a good lever to have if you can get a bunch of authors who can magnify your voice. So I think the Dragon Awards by themselves were poised to be a more valid mass market measurement of what the fans think is quality work than the Hugos have ever been, ever. And because of that, that makes them as they continue to grow, as people continue to be aware of them and participate, that will make them a more accurate judge of what the fandom, and I don't mean that in the capital F sense that people in, SMOF might mean. I mean, everyday ordinary people who happen to love science fiction and fantasy and who've been enjoying it in movies and enjoying it, but not enjoying it in books, will be drawn in. And I think it will be a more accurate gauge of what their opinion is about the state of quality of the year than any other award.
The Dragons have a very, very big problem, though. A fatal flaw, I would even go so far as to say. There's no best cine pro zine category. There's no best related work. There's no best science fiction and fantasy group blog. I don't know if it can overcome this problem unless it reforms.
Oh, give them a few years to add some more categories.
You had me fooled for a second. I'm going to utter one very small correction to Daddy Warpig, maybe because I'm older, which is the Hugos back in the day did used to actually accurately reflect what the popular opinion among science fiction readers was. And I'm talking back in the day before there was a science fiction media audience. There wasn't anyone who watched Star Trek on TV who didn't also read science fiction books, or at least not that I was aware of. So the Hugos have been corrupted. They used to actually stand for the popular opinion of what all the science fiction readers read and talked about and liked. The Nebula was supposed to be the editors picking something. That was supposed to be the high class thing, and the Hugos were supposed to be the popular thing, the stuff the rest of us liked. But now he's completely right. Now they're just it's become a political award for people who have the correct political opinions.
This is
even growing up in the 80s and early 90s, well, mid 90s, like I can remember if I saw that Hugo stamp on a book, I knew I was probably going to have a good time reading it. And it took years of crap for me to like realize that something had changed. And it breaks my heart because I look at Hyperion, and that is still one of my favorite books ever. And
it's great.
Yeah, to have that associated with some of this crap that's out there now, I don't know.
More pictures, please. Come on.
Well, the SJWs are parasites. They have to attack a healthy host in order for the parasite to live. They never create anything themselves. They just take what other people have made and gender swap it or race swap it and make it and try to use it for a message that they're trying to put across. But the message is false, and so that's why they have to rely on other people's works. Fundamentally, if we stop helping them, if we stop lending them our strength, they'll fall into dust. Mm-hmm. And I think starting our own platform and starting a new movement that's devoted to pleasing the audience, because I was always taught, I've always believed that the customer is king. The guys who read my books, who buy my books, are my boss. So I treat them with the same respect I would treat any boss anywhere I was working, if at a McDonald's or at a bar or at a law firm or at a newspaper office, all of which I've worked for, except for I was in a deli, not in a. Never mind that. Never mind what I'm talking about. Treating your customers like they're your boss instead of like they're children in the remedial class that you have to talk down to. I can't believe these guys get away with this. I can't believe that anyone pays them money to buy their books when they're being lectured to. Like, they're the dumb ones. They're being lectured to by science fiction writers. Does anyone know what a bunch of... I mean, come on. I'd rather take advice from a street bum. At least he might have served in the military or something.
When
did anyone fall like the...
Hey, I wanted to ask a question, especially to you, Daddy, because you were just talking about this. Do the SJWs actually get any enjoyment out of reading the kind of stuff that they put out?
Misery loves
kind of stuff.
Misery loves company.
I mean, do they actually enjoy it? I mean, or is it just a righteousness thing? I mean, is there any solace or uplifting in it to them?
I think they get a great deal of enjoyment out of claiming to have read things because it gives them social status, and
and it's not
I don't
that
think
they cozy up to.
I think it's the grim feeling that they know the truth and everyone around them is a fool who is deceiving themselves.
Yeah,
I think that's the emotion they're looking for, the feeling of self-righteousness.
It's mental, masturbation. Like, that's all it is. It's like, oh, I've read Ulysses. Oh, you've read that literal doorstop. It's that. And then you write a paper about it, and everyone says, oh, this is a fantastic doorstop, and then it continues on. I got 5 pages into Ulysses, and I said I don't care, and got off of Project Gutenberg to another thing. Real fast.
Oh, it's terrible. It's like the Ulysses is to literature what the toilet that was referred to earlier that was hung up in an art museum was to the visual arts.
I want to make a point about
urinal, assigned urinal.
Assigned urinal. Yeah.
A point about creativity and why the pulp revolution is so devastating and will continue to be even more devastating in the future. And I'm going to start with a small, seemingly innocuous or maybe irrelevant point. Compare last year's Dragon Award, and I'm talking about the physical statue or statuettes they gave out.
Wait, hold on. Let me go look at mine, which is sitting right here. Wow. Sorry, I can't get back to the microphone. My ego's in the way.
Compare that to the last 10 years of Hugo Rounds. And in my opinion, the Dragon Award itself is gorgeous. I think it's beautiful. I think that each one was unique and that they were stunning. And I was amazed when they trotted them out. I'm like, that is something that is really good looking. And the Hugo Awards change every year, but in my opinion, they're kind of boring. They're kind of staid. They don't really do anything for me. They don't evoke a sense of wonder or awe. So
the Hugo Awards look like something you get out of a cheap souvenir shop for maybe $10. The Dragon Awards are all hand-blown glass. I carried a few of those things around. They're about, I want to say about 10 pounds each, because those things are heavy, especially if you're carrying 3 of them. And yes, the unique look to each looks like a liquid droplet of fire contained within. So yeah, then there's the Hugos and crap.
That may seem like a superficial point, but I think there is a real dearth of creativity among people who have, one, cut themselves off from the moral center of the West, or the cultural font that the West springs from. I think that hampers your creativity quite a bit. Not that they can't be creative, not that people who have done it can't be creative at all, but it is a progressive and degenerative disease of the soul and the mind that prevents people from fully utilizing the talents they were given. And at the same time, exterior to that, there are a lot of artificial restrictions that have been imposed on the genre of fantasy and science fiction, relating to primarily to genre and what is or is not appropriate. And you can especially see this in epic fantasy, how very small and how very tight and how very constrained what people think is acceptable and what the audience is used to getting. And if you go back in time and read A Merit, or you read, for example, I know this isn't technically pulp, but Jack Vance's stories, because they were part of Appendix N, got wrapped into the pulp revolution. All of these Jack Vance's Dying Earth stories, the amount of imagination and creativity and wild, unbound by any rules of genre or subgenre or sub-subgenre, that kind of creative freedom is now available to the pulp revolutionaries. They can expand what they're going to be writing about, and at the same time, they're not bound by this degenerative disease of the imagination and of the talent, so that they are more creative as far as their craft goes than the competition. We are a group of people that has picked up tools that were discarded by all the other people in the mainstream, and because of that, because they disdained these tools or just were completely ignorant that they existed, ignorant of their existence, that gives us a massive competitive advantage, even setting aside, even assuming for a moment that they were just as devoted to pleasing the audience, we still have a massive creative advantage. And so I think that as you list more and more advantages that accrue to the pulp revolution, it becomes quickly obvious that something big is going to happen. And one can say, well, you guys are all brand new, most of you are going to be failed writers. Fine. Maybe that's true. I don't think it is, but maybe it's true. But there is people coming in and joining this who see that same freedom, who can pick up those same tools and run with them.
I gotta applaud your comment, Daddy Warpig, because if you look at any of the old pulp magazines, you'll see that the genre boxes simply did not exist. If you wanted to write a story about a science fantasy or a weird Western or a Western science fantasy time travel romance story, you just did it, okay? And if you wanted to throw in the Babylonian gods, then you were a merit on top of that. And I noticed that the 1960s and 70s comic books used to have that freedom, where you would have a guy in a robot suit next to a wizard, next to a Norse god, next to a super spy, next to the Wendigo monster thing from a scientific experiment, and they did not care about the genre boxes. In fact, they sort of formed their own genre after a while, and they are now being taken over completely by the SJWs. And the intellectual freedom, the artistic creativity that we can unleash with this revolution is amazing and immense and long overdue.
Let's see how it goes. Oh, sorry, Daddy Warpig made a comment I thought was interesting. So the SJWs are saying, "Oh, you'll all end up being failed writers." Isn't that true? But isn't that true of most writers? I mean, like, presumably the number of people that write and the number of people that find much success at it are not one-to-one by any stretch of the imagination, but probably thousands to one. So
John Milton got paid £10 for Paradise Lost. £10 money for Paradise Lost.
Well, that was good back then.
Most people.
Homer was paid in wine.
I mean,
sorry, say again?
So most people when they try something creative fail at it ultimately. If by succeed you mean make a living at it or something like that, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just that's why Sturgeon.
That's why Sturgeon's law operates. That's why 90% of everything is crud. Is because you have to tell a lot of bad jokes to tell a good joke. You have to write a lot of bad stories to tell a good story. I mean, it's just the nature of reality.
But I mean, like,
no shoemaker makes a perfect shoe the first time he sits down at the shoemaker's bench.
But it's not. It's just to say, oh, you're all failed writers. Well, most writers are, and it's not a bad thing. It's just it's competitive and.
But who's saying that? These guys who are writing this literary cul-de-sac, this dead end that no one's going to read 5 years from now or 10 years from now, written by people whose names not even other science fiction readers know, even though they've won the award for most prestigious SJW LBGT QXYWP award. I mean, who cares about these people? They're not pleasing anyone, and I bet you that with my Dragon Award, I could smash to pieces anyone who was trying to parry just with the Hugo Award. I think it's a steadier, heavier award, so I think we could win the fight. Yeah, if it wasn't a question of death ball rather than free market competition.
It's like when people go, well, the music when I was growing up is so much better than the music today. I mean, you listen to the music, so people. Well, I came of age in the early '90s when Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all that were around, and people go, "Oh yeah, the music back then's superior to so much of the music today." Well, of course it is. Anything that someone's listening to 20 years later and still like, it's got to have some staying power and has to be reasonable. And I was listening to music sort of back then and keeping up with the new releases and stuff. Heaps of it was garbage. Most of it was garbage. And it's only the things that have stood the test of time that anyone remembers.
But they don't have that. They don't have that. They've repudiated the concept of a canon.
Yeah.
So they do.
Canon is Harry Potter.
So there's nothing. There's no subject in writing that you can bring up that people in the pulp revolution cannot mention 5 or even 10 writers from before 1980 that illustrate things you can do with that particular element of storytelling.
Let me tell you something, folks. Let me make another prediction that people are going to look at, are going to think is kind of crazy right now, but are going to look back on and say, oh, wow, Daddy Warpig was right. Harry Potter's time, there's a timer on Harry Potter until it, too, becomes too problematic to read, and that timer is running down. Sooner or later, SJWs turn on everything, and whatever the reason is, and I'm not sure what the reason why they'll reject Harry Potter, maybe because the 3 main characters are not diverse enough, maybe because they didn't include enough LGBTQ LGBTQIA characters, maybe because she wasn't brave enough to actually make Dumbledore out and proud. I don't know what it is, but sooner or later they're going to turn on Harry Potter and savage it too.
And then the
no one is going to call that. No one is going to call that prediction crazy. That's like predicting the sun will come up tomorrow. The reason why SJWs attack things is because they get street cred for attacking something that other people regard as sacrosanct. They're iconoclasts. So anything even they regard as sacrosanct is going to be subjected to an attack sooner or later. So I completely agree. I completely agree with your prediction, and I'd be surprised if it hasn't already happened in some quarters.
They're already starting.
About a year. Heck, you go, oh, look, Voldemort is pure evil. Oh, my God, pure evil. Evil is purely subjective. We can't have that. Burn the witch!
Yeah. It's too popular. I mean, it's too good and too nice and too popular. So I'm sure people who are deeply into SJW can't bring themselves to like it. The good guys are good guys. In fact, the reason why I picked up my first Harry Potter book back in the day, the reason why I picked it up at all is because I'd heard on the radio that leftists were complaining about it. This is not right-wingers who were complaining that it's teaching kids to be occultists, which I think, by the way, is an absurd assertion. But leftists complaining that it was teaching kids to be rebellious. Now, if you want to talk about how different the left is from when it was in my youth, the left in my youth were always on the side of the rebels, no matter who the rebels were. Now they're the establishment.
But that's before they were in charge. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that most of these SJWs tend to give each other the hand up. Like Patrick Nielsen Hayden is largely credited in the Vox Day circles, which I frequent, to making John Scalzi and making sure that he got all the tender gloves and all that good stuff, including the recent fat check that he got for books that he can't seem to write. Which is just amusing me to all get out. So it's like, you take them who handshake each other, give each other the pat on the back and give each other awards and all that good stuff, compared to us, which is all about the merit of the works. I don't care whether a story gets canceled here or whatever, because I know that I'm, fighting with quality. If my novel in the Seraglio of the Sheik of Mars wasn't accepted as a serial into the magazine, I just buy a cover for it, slap it on Amazon, and then work, scheme for the next, plan of cisgendered normity that I am to take the whatever by storm.
They can't even talk about merit, though.
Yeah, he's right.
When they repudiate the canon, they lose the capacity to measure a work according to an objective standard. So when I start talking about John C. Wright's work and I can place him in the train of Lord Dunsany, C.L. Moore, Paul Anderson, John C. Wright. Everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say that. I wish they did. But there's a substance there to those kind of claims, and you can have a discussion about that. But their concept of quality, of what's valuable, of what they're even shooting for, you can't even have a discussion about it because it's just an illusion and it's very temporary.
By the way, you have to swap out C.L. Moore and swap in Jack Vance because I'm copying Vance, who's copying Dunsany. But you're right about my particular pedigree. You're exactly right. Sorry, didn't mean to throw every game. Please continue.
No, but there's no conversation there, and I want to cite back again Frisky Pagan's, and I'm sorry I don't know his real name. I just know his blogger's name. But Frisky Pagan's book Dangerous Gamers. He charts the history of this topic in a way that very few people in the conversation have in the past few years. Their idea of politics and message are not really, they don't really deserve those terms. They're kind of an anti-message or an anti-politics or an anti-culture. They're the antimatter of criticism. So you can't debate them on those terms. You have to set up an entirely new critical frame in order to move forward, which is why we're going back to the roots.
You're right about them. They are nihilists, and a nihilist is someone who doesn't criticize; they just anti-criticize. They don't have a religion; they just have an anti-religion. They don't have a politics; they're just anarchists. They don't have a metaphysics; they don't have a mental framework for discussing anything. They're like a character from a Marx Brothers movie who, once he takes over Fredonia, whatever you're in favor of, he's against it.
What are you rebelling against? What have you got?
Yeah. Yep. What are you rebelling against? Well, what have you got? Because they think of who was it quoted? I forget what the quote was earlier in this conversation. That wisdom was it Damon Knight? Wise enough not to believe in anything. You know, that's them. That's them in a nutshell.
A ludicrous thing to say.
What's funny is the new indie movement. The fact that we can go around these gatekeepers now, which was not an option that we had 20 years ago or even 10 years ago as much, means that we can now work for our bosses directly. And what those guys are, we're actually rebelling against the bosses. And by the bosses, I mean the paying customers.
Don't call it
those
indie.
Guys were.
It's not indie anymore.
What should I call it? What should I call it?
This is science fiction fantasy. They are fake sci-fi. They are fake book. We're not indie anymore. We are it.
I have been told, and I don't have a way to verify this, that there are several independent authors writing science fiction and fantasy.
I had come to say that was excellent.
Jason Onspot, for example.
Well, don't compliment him too much. He's the guy that tried to change the definition of the golden age on us. So don't encourage them. So that one was good. That one I agree with. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
They are selling in numbers that are huge, far more than anybody else realizes, or far more than gets talked about in the media. And there is a good argument to be made that the people who are publishing through Amazon and other places who are not part of the mainstream are already supplanting the mainstream. And I think that's what Jeffro is saying.
Oh, no, I completely agree with
sales.
Just absolutely. So the pulp, I mean, there's nothing that can stop this pulp revolution now, because we don't have. There's no gatekeeper that we have to kiss his toe.
And right? Jeff Bezos, he looks like Box Day now. It's like he's been working out every day for the past 5 years to look like Box Day. So I think this is in the bag, y'all.
I see it.
I'm confused. Did Vox Day bite him on the neck or something, and the Voxness is spreading? Or how does that exactly work?
It's still silent times.
Bezos is potentially a problem. I guess we'll see how it goes, because he's a raging lefty. It's just so far he seems to prefer making massive piles of money to giving into the SJW lunacy.
I am as a matter of practicality, I'm very wary of any one corporation controlling. It's not technically a monopoly, but it is technically a monopsony. And somebody can go search that and you'll find out the difference. But it makes me wary to think about how much power Amazon has over our distribution channels, but they are not exercising it yet. And I'm hoping that the people who are thinking these things through are preparing alternate distribution channels in case something goes wrong at Amazon.
And even then, if all this stuff disappears, like, people will go searching for it, those who want it, and it'll spread like a virus. Like, it doesn't matter what the gatekeepers or the greater gatekeepers like Jeff Bezos try to do to us, because it's the internet.
Don't be too confident.
Oh, I'm too confident.
Because don't be too confident about that, because I just heard from some people who went to Germany recently, and they found out they could not download from YouTube any right-leaning YouTube videos because the government shut it off. They couldn't call an Uber car. They couldn't. There were certain sites that were just shut down by the government there.
Well, it sounds
since
like
the thing is all centralized and computerized.
Yeah.
Well, that only works. That only works insofar as you can control those things. But well, look at it this way. Spotify has an ad network and likes to put ads in the music. If you want to listen to Spotify without ads, go get a VPN and connect to Russia. They don't do ads in Russia. Problem solved. You can work around most of these sorts of distribution problems.
I want to say this.
And it's not very hard. And if you're not using a VPN on the internet, you're mad. Anyway.
I want to say this about the pulp revolution. Another advantage that I haven't discussed up to now on the show is at this point, the ambitions of people in the pulp revolution are far greater than anybody has really paid attention to yet, because it isn't just about growing an audience in terms of finding people who are reading right now and convincing them to also read and buy your stuff. The stated goal of many people who are writing in the pulp revolution right now, and Jeffro touched on this earlier, is to reach out to those who would have been readers 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 60 years ago, but who have been driven away by the dreariness of literary science fiction and fantasy, who would have been readers and are not today. That if we can reach them either as adults or as children and get them to start reading again and get them to start reading pulp revolution material again, that is a huge and underserved and untapped market. It is not just about reaching readers, it's about creating a whole new generation of readers, which gives, and there's vast numbers of people who could be readers that are not. And I think that they could be readers again if they were given stories that meant something to them, given stories that motivate them, given stories that they love. And I believe that that untapped market, if the pulp revolution can get the word out to those people and get them to start reading again and get them to start reading pulp revolution books, that is going to be a massive competitive advantage as far as not only earning money, but bringing new people in who want to write. Because you cannot read a pulp story from the 1920s. You can't read Edgar Rice Burroughs or Robert E. Howard and not want to think about at least writing something of your own, whether or not you're going to publish it. And I think you can find a whole new generation of writers, and I think you can find a whole new generation of readers, and I think people who can tap into that market will be very, very successful, and that will quickly devastate, destroy, and obviate the establishment of publishing.
Right, there's a whole lot of people that walk into Barnes and Noble and they pick up those magazines, Asimov's and Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and they pick them up and Analog, and they just, it leaves them cold. And then they walk into the fantasy and science fiction section, and they don't feel there's nothing about those covers that make them want to pick them up and buy it. You know, there's a lot of people there that would be reading, and they just aren't. And if you look at the history of it, you know, this has happened before. You know, when Princess of Mars and Tarzan of the Apes came out, American culture was transformed, and America became a nation of readers in a huge way. And right now, it's going to happen in fiction first, because, you know, large-scale video games and large-scale movies, they take so much capital and so much time and so much effort to make. But right now, if you change the composition of the people that are writing short fiction and short novels, like 200-page novels, and if you change that, the complexion of that scene, you're talking about something that is transformative, and it's already underway. It's just so easy to jump into this, this is ground. This is intellectual and artistic and cultural ground that can be retaken very quickly.
Let's hope so.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Like I got two ambitions for myself as a writer, you know. With now that it's all getting started, I now consider myself like in the hallowed halls and the smallest bust in the corner of this revolution. But is that to be the greatest of my generation of writers of science fiction, fantasy, and all that good stuff, but also to greatly swell the amount of books I wish I had as a child. Like, I love the audience. I love anyone who reads my books and thinks well of it, and maybe those who think it's just okay. But you know, I write this stuff primarily because I want to see it come out, and I want other people to share this with me. Like as a child, I was quite lonely, so I had my imagination to keep me company. So it's like all this stuff that's in my head, I can now pour it forth in a wide-ranging torrent to write books and all these good things that enliven and embolden and provide material for the imagination of others like myself or more sociable than myself. It's like, that's what I want to see. And I know that, these SJWs, like the first step is to overcome them, but it's such a low step. I think my mother, who is, crippled in the legs a bit, can just shuffle over it quite easily,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The whole reason that I started writing was that, I felt there was a shortage of the kind of stories that I wanted to read. And so I felt compelled to add to them. And lately that means that I'm turning into a pastiche of John C. Wright. But but I'm there with you. It's what I want to write is the kind of stuff that I wish I had there to read. So
it's okay, because I'm a pastiche of all my favorite authors too. So you're carrying on the tradition. I mean, I write like a Jack Vance version of A.E. Van Vogt. That's the stuff I write.
You lost,
but I was wondering.
You lost a few cool points when I started. You lost a few points of cool when I started reading your influences, and I found out that the sofa text came from Paul Anderson and stuff like that. I was like, oh,
if I lose cool for a copy from Paul Anderson, then your cool stick is out of whack, buddy. Paul Anderson is one of the greatest science fiction writers of all time. He should be in the top 3. He should be more famous.
You're misunderstanding me. It's
you thought I was original?
Yes. There we go. But I feel better about
originality is overrated. Originality is a stolen concept.
I think it's also going to stealing from other authors now that I know you and Gene Wolfe both do it. So
no, look. Let me explain to you. Mid-list authors, medium authors are original. Okay, great authors steal from people. Really great authors steal from great people, beat them up, leave them drunk in the alley, and stake their stuff out of their pockets and use that. I'm at the top level here. Okay, I'm waiting for Homer or Milton to walk by so I can club them over the head, drag them out of sight, and go through their pockets for their extra material. So that's me. But the way I make it look original to the unenlightened is I steal from more than one source at once. I don't ever do just a direct copy of someone else's stuff. I go, well, what if I did Tarzan in space? Okay, that's already been done. What if I did Count of Monte Cristo in space? Okay, well, that one's already been done. But I do things like that. That's the way all creative people actually operate. One thing I wanted to say, if I can change this topic slightly just to make a point about the pulp revolution is, recently in politics, there's a large mass of common, working, everyday guys who were ignored by the elites. And I don't think they're being ignored anymore because they were an untapped audience. And pulp fiction, pulp fantasy back in the day, was meant for your average, working man who got off his shift and he wanted to read a magazine and he wanted to read about something fantastic. And that audience is also never going to be interested in this SJW stuff because SJW stuff is always talking about, call it first world problems, call it the problems that bored elites have, where they find their life is meaningless because they've turned their back on the moral core of the universe. And so they write stories about bored people doing boring things because that's what they are talking about. Oh, by the way, I clubbed them with my Dragon Award because it's nice and hefty. I should mention that in the Ben Wheeler's making a comment about my tasteless joke. The average guy, the average reader,
that's a very large audience.
Has been ignored. And it's a huge audience, and it's been ignored by the magazines used to cater to them, and they don't anymore. Yeah. I stopped reading analog, and I used to be the biggest analog fan in the world, and they're just no good anymore.
Oh, yeah, can I just throw in, speaking of customers and giving them what they want? So far, Astounding Frontiers has 1 review on Amazon. I gave the authors 10 minutes of my time, and they gave my imagination a boost beyond belief. Thank you, Don E. Nelson, whoever you are. That's a really nice review.
Fantastic.
I have to quote that.
I'm a big fan, by the way, everyone listening. I haven't read Astounding Frontiers yet because the new Nick Cole book dropped last night, so I haven't had a chance. You dropped on the same day as the new Nick Cole book, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But I really, really hope that Astounding does well. I really, really hope the Story Hack does well. And I'm also a big fan of Kursova magazine. And there's also another Pulp Revolution magazine I can't remember the name of. If I could remember it, I would mention it. I don't have anything against you, I promise.
Broadsides and Blasters? Is that the one you mean?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Not Lioness?
Oh, yeah, definitely Lioness. Don't forget Lioness.
Oh, that would be it. Yes, that was the other one.
From Silver Empire Publishing. I'm sure my publisher will be happy to know that I got it on the radio.
It's all good. All right. Well, do anyone have any final thoughts? I guess we should probably wrap it up here.
I'll say something.
Coming up to 2 hours. So
go on. Of course, I've got something else to say. I really, really think that people in this country need and deserve a pool of authors who put their audience first, who work as hard as they can to make books that the audience will love, and who draw upon a wide range of different influences and who have no innate restrictions of genre. I think that is a potent and a powerful combination, and I think that the readers of this country and the potential readers of this country and all over the world deserve to have good, moving, entertaining, well-written books that blow their minds with how imaginative and creative and awesome they are. And I think that they have been denied that, other than little pieces here and there. They've been denied that at the major publishers. They've been denied that at major bookstores. And I'm hoping that the Pulp Revolution crowd can step up and fulfill that role, because in addition to providing what the audience is direly needing, they can provide stories that are worthwhile, that are worth reading, stories with heroism, stories with courage, stories of adventure, stories that mean something, that speak to the deepest, most innermost parts and values that we as human beings have, stories that are universal in the sense that honor and virtue and generosity are issues that every culture has. Stories that someone can read 1,000 years from now, and they may not get all of the geeky in-jokes. They may not understand the literary antecedents of this one story, but they will know what heroism is, and they will know that these stories reflected that, or they will know what morality is, and they will know what virtue is, because everyone has those values in there. And I really, really hope that is the potential I see in the Pulp Revolution. And I really, really hope the crop of authors who are involved right now, those who are going to become new authors, and those who are already authors who join and want to start looking at these inspirations and writing more and taking inspiration from them, I really, really hope they can fulfill that, because I think that is something this civilization direly, desperately needs.
I have a closing comment, which is much less inspiring than what Daddy Warpig just said, which is, if you ever run across someone who criticizes your work, any new authors I'm speaking to now, and their criticism is, you show too much moral certainty, therefore you are a Nazi, all I have to say is, my first book, one of the first reviews I ever got, and this was back when I was a new author and I wasn't familiar with how dumb these reviews can get, was someone who read my book, The Golden Age, which was a completely libertarian, completely totally objectivist fantasy set in a libertarian utopia. And the reviewer said, this main character, who is a Stalin, is just like Stalin because he believes he's right. And so for the reviewer to say that the complete libertarian, practically anarchist guy was Stalin, their thinking is the nihilist worldview believes that moral certainty is the source of all the world's ills. They think the original sin is that not that man sinned, but that man was right. That someone thought he was right. Their belief is that if no one believes they're right, then no one's going to argue about it, and they're completely certain about that. They're certain that no one should be certain. So if you are doing it right, you're going to run across this. It's going to happen to you. People are going to say the same argument because it's the only argument they make. If you see what I'm saying. So don't be alarmed if someone throws that at you. It's just nonsense.
Well, they're kind of right. I've got no doubt in the righteousness of our crusade.
But they're not right at all because they contradict themselves. You can't be certain that there's no such thing as certainty. That's ridiculous. But it doesn't mean anything.
When that ideology came into the culture of fantasy and science fiction, there's something that people outside of our immediate scene are not ready for, and that is they think that Sturgeon's law holds. They think, and that argument was originally a defense of the pulps to people outside of the pulps that had these kind of smug, condescending attitudes. And I'm going to have to disagree with Sturgeon. It's a lousy defense of what we are and what we're doing and what the pulps were. It's terrible because 90% of the pulps was not trash. Go back and pick up the average pulp magazine, a Weird Tales or some any of those old collections. How hit or miss is it? I mean, really, when you get down to it, you can look at Alex Kimball's reviews where he's tracking this, and he compares that with the 70s. It is night and day, and it's night and day again when you compare the 70s to today. People expect 90% of everything to be crap in fantasy and science fiction writing, but the reality is, you pick up an anthology at Barnes & Noble, chances are, how many good ones are going to be in there? No, 90% of that really is crap. You would be lucky to get one decent one. With the pulps, it's the exact opposite. You have brilliant stuff back there in those things, and 90% of it was actually pretty good, and it's pretty good because it doesn't take this mean-spirited, low-minded, condescending attitude towards the reader. You take that out, and you're automatically in the pretty good category by default. 100%
of SJW fiction is crap.
Yes.
It's by design. It's by design. It's the same reason that the person hung up a toilet in an art museum. They're trying to shock you with how crappy they are.
And this is going to be big. You know, the more people find out about this, the more they will become readers, and then the more this will feed on itself and grow. And this is the best time in history to be a fantasy and science fiction fan because this is going to be so exciting. You can't imagine what's coming over the next 3 years. Yeah.
Let's hope so. All right. Well, on that note, thank you everyone for participating, and thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Grab a copy of Astounding Frontiers and check out some of the other publications mentioned. All right. And